Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our amphitheater demonstration stage here at the Corning Museum of Glass. For anybody joining us online, welcome virtually as well. So we're going to do a glassmaking demonstration for you. This morning is one of our special engagements. It's a program we've had here at the museum for a long time called You Design It and We Make It. And it has been on a hiatus for a while, but we're excited to have it back. So essentially, the short of it is that our guests and fans from around the world submit illustrations on a theme, and then we'll choose one of those illustrations and create it in glass. So this You Design It theme was, I'm not sure, but we're making... It was Pumpkin Spice and Everything Nice. I did read that somewhere, but I wasn't sure if that was what our chosen artists wrote on their submission or if that was the theme. So today's theme, of course, the fall, the holiday, that snuggly pumpkin spice flavor that a lot of people love and enjoy. So our illustration is actually a stylized pumpkin spice mug complete with whipped cream and a cinnamon stick, and you can really see the theme running through the drawing. Of course, the mug itself is a pumpkin, and so our artist that will be creating this design is Chris Rochelle. He's right here, so he'll be the lead artist on the team, and he's already getting started on some of the pieces that will come together to build this sculpture. He's going to be assisted by Alex Young, and we've done some practice and discussion and planning for this piece. My name is Jamie. I'm going to be narrating through the process, and then eventually I'll jump on the team as well as it starts to get more complicated in the end. So glassmaking really is a team-oriented art form. You can work glass on your own at the furnace. It's a bit limiting. There's lots of things that you can't do all by yourself, but there's a few things that you can do. Other ways to work glass, like flame working, cold working, or what's called warm glass, can be done on your own. Stained glass, you just keep going. Jewelry, glass jewelry, so you can get creative. So there are ways to work with this material on your own, but here in the hot shop, you almost always want to have an assistant. 2 glass blowers is a good amount to make most pieces, but as the forms get more and more complicated, you'll want to have a few extra hands around the shop. So the lead artist on a glassmaking team is called the gaffer. And gaffer comes from an Old English word that meant grandfather. So it's more or less a sign of respect in the hot shop. And now, of course, all of our gaffers are not grandfathers, but it's still just terminology or lingo that we use to refer to the lead artist on the team. So the design of this piece is, of course, up to our designer, Sarah Zani or Zany. I'm not sure. That's kind of, when we get virtual submissions, pronunciations can be askew. I'm going to go with Zany, because that feels a little bit more fun to me this morning. So Sarah Zany submitted this design for our Pumpkin Spice and Everything Nice theme, but Chris is going to be the artist or the craftsperson that creates that design. And that's actually how a lot of glassmaking really happened in the beginning, not in the ancient glassmaking world, but there's always been a lot of designers separate from the craftspeople that would work with this material to create these objects. And then in the late 60s, early 70s, in the United States, the glass art movement began. And the people that were the craftsmen and women of the material were also the designers and the artists. So it's really a very young art form in the States. Maybe about 15 or so years ago, there were about 30 different universities in the United States where you could study glassmaking. And then just, 15 or so years later, we're up to somewhere around 50 or so where you can go to college for glassmaking. And most of your younger glassmakers will have gotten started in that way. They'll find it at university or go there to study it. Chris and myself both did that. Alex as well. Alex is actually a senior close by at Alfred University, and she comes to work with us in the summers and on the weekends. So there's lots of different universities in the States and all over the world where you can study glassmaking. And it does take quite a few years to develop your skill with this material to be able to proficiently create what you'd like to create. Chris has been working glass now for about 21 years, myself for about 16, and Alex for about 7. So on average, we'll say it takes about 3 to 5 years to kind of get things started with the material. The first thing that every glass, or I guess wishful glass artist creates is a mess on the floor. The glass in the melting furnace at 2,100 degrees Fahrenheit moves and flows like honey. So the first thing you have to do to work with glass is draw it out of the furnace and then keep it on the end of the iron. And that doesn't go so well right away. However, through years of persistent practice and training, you can develop your skills with this material. And something wonderful about glass is there's always something new to try, a new technique to work on, a new way to challenge yourself, so you really can become a student for life. And just like anything, some people pick it up a little bit faster than others, but what it comes down to is consistent and persistent in the beginning practice. Prior to glass artists going to university for glass, it was a factory position. This building here is actually the Steuben, or used to be the Steuben glass factory, and it was so for about 106 years. And that factory had an apprenticeship program that was 10,000 hours or 5 years. And then they would let you be the assistant. So that kind of gives you an idea about how long it takes to develop your skill with glass. So we're getting started with today's piece by prepping some pieces or separate parts. There's lots of different ways to work glass just here in the hot shop. A question that we get often is, how long can you work on a piece of glass? And the answer is kind of, almost just as long as you want, really, because parts can be made on separate days, brought back into the hot shop and added to create a sculpture. We can start a piece at 9 o'clock in the morning, prepping parts and various things, and then come back after lunch and finish it up. You can create pieces, allow them to cool down, carve into the glass, create designs that way, reheat them, and bring them back up in the hot shop. So there's quite a few processes that can last quite a long time. For this piece today, we won't keep you here for days or all day long or anything like that, but we are going to do a few pieces prior to getting to that main or central form. So the first part that Chris is working on is going to be the leaf part of the design that you see on the lower half of the mug. What we'll do with our pre-made parts is set them inside of a unit called a garage. So this glass blowing stage or studio was put together after the Steuben glass factory closed, and we were able to really design it to our heart's content. So it's glass blower Disneyland down here. We've got all the toys, and we did that intentionally to sort of, we built it, hopefully they'll come. We have demonstrations on this stage with world-renowned glass artists, and we like to say, if you can think of how to create it or think of something interesting or new and unique, we'll find a way to make it down here with all of the bells and whistles that we were able to acquire and have here at the Corning Museum of Glass. So it's a really great place to make work or to just come to work every day. But in any event, one of the tools that we have is the garage. So sorry to hide back here in the corner while I narrate, but here's where the garage sits. This unit is designed to hold that leaf for us until we're ready to incorporate it into the main design. The glass that we work with is called soda lime glass. There are many different types of glass. I'm going to come back to that, so I don't want to get too far away from the garage, which I was just discussing. But essentially, our glass will experience thermal shock due to drastic temperature changes. So what the garage is going to do for us is hold the glass at the right temperature. Inside the melting furnace at 2,100 degrees, remember I talked about how we dribble it all over the floor usually that first time we gather glass out of the furnace, and that's because it moves and flows almost like honey at that temperature point. It sets up and becomes rigid as it cools. Roughly around 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, the glass is completely solid. It's no longer moving around. We actually consider the glass to be cold at that point because it is set in place or kind of frozen solid. Also, that's the point at which it's vulnerable to that cracking and breaking or that thermal shock. So the glass can be drawn from the furnace at 2,000 degrees, cool rapidly, no worries until it gets around 1,000. And if it cools too rapidly below that, it will start to fracture and crack and break. Glass actually shrinks a little bit as it cools down. And if any part of the glass is cooling faster than another part of the glass, it's shrinking at different rates, and this builds up tension or stress in the glass and will cause it to fracture. So we want to make sure that while we're creating a piece of glass, we never let any part of it drop below that threshold because we don't want it to crack and break on us. So what the garage will do once Chris has all of the fine details set into the leaf is it will hold it at roughly about, well, I can't see the dial, but it's probably around 950 degrees, which is just warm enough to prevent that thermal shock from happening, but not so warm that it's going to keep moving or changing shape. So we'll create these various pieces and set them into that unit, and it will essentially babysit, or the glass will be parked inside of the garage. And when we're ready to add it to the piece, we just have to do a little bit of preheating, but I'll talk about that perhaps a little bit better when we're at that moment in the piece. Another option we have for pre-making parts is a pickup box. So you notice around the stage we've got a lot of essentially black boxes, but those are all ovens. We have smaller ones on wheels, and they just open up kind of like a toy chest, and we can make objects and place them inside of there. Again, control the temperature, set it just right, and come back and remove those items later on to incorporate into our pieces. It all kind of depends on the preference of the glassmaker and, of course, the objects that we're creating. You want to have good control over the heat at all times with glass. Temperature control is absolutely key in glass making, starting from the very beginning at that melting furnace. The 2100 degree temperature point that I've discussed already gives us that honey-like consistency in the glass. If we raise that temperature up, the glass will start to move and flow almost like water. And then, as I said, if we lower that temperature down, it becomes more rigid, or in the furnace, it would kind of, start to set up and become gooier. And we set it to a specific temperature point to serve the purpose that we want. The honey-like consistency is great for gathering the glass out of the furnace and starting to build our work. The water-like consistency would be used if we were going to cast the glass, in which case we more or less scoop the glass out of the furnace in a ladle and pour it into a mold. So if we were doing that technique, we would want it to flow more like water. And lowering the temperature point, there are a few glass makers that like to do that, and that would simply allow them to gather more material than they'd be able to gather if the glass was set to that 2100 or degree temperature point to give them that honey-like consistency. So right from the very beginning, controlling the temperature of the glass is how we control how the glass is going to move and flow. So our leaf is completed. We're going to set that inside of the garage. We don't have to watch over it too much. We've got the right temperature over there, and then we'll move on to prepping some other parts. I believe what we're going to do next is the cinnamon stick. All right, so we're going to get started on that next piece. Now our cinnamon stick is going to be pretty small, but there is an object that we create in glass called cane, and then eventually murrini, that is made by drawing the glass or stretching the glass out. Fiber optic cable, of course, is also glass, drawn out into a fine thread. So Chris is going to stretch this glass out to create that cinnamon stick, but it's going to be on a pretty small scale because we just need one cinnamon stick. However, if we had a project going, let's say we were going to make a whole bunch of these mugs, we would probably create that cinnamon stick by creating glass cane, and we'd essentially get set up with a bunch of glass cinnamon sticks. So there's lots of different ways to create cane. Chris is colorizing the glass with crushed up glass color. It's actually a powdered color. We get the glass color in all different sizes, so we can get it in little chips that look kind of like coarse salt, or also big chunks of it that kind of look more like rolled oats. We can also get it in color bar form. So this is solid glass color. This jar here has some bright green, crushed up, kind of like coarse salt size glass color in it. So Chris is going to work with the powder and create the color that he pre-designed before the demonstration to get that cinnamon stick look. But we could also create cane with the color bar. And one of the easiest ways, not that it's easy at all to create glass cane, would be to start with this color bar. Probably break it off, a little piece like that. You preheat it, because if we just go right into the furnace with this cold glass, it will experience that thermal shock I talked about and crack and break. So we would preheat that piece of color bar. We would collect it from one of our small holding ovens or pickup ovens and introduce it to the furnace heat, which is all three of these furnaces are running over 2,000 degrees. Once we had it up to temperature, we would gather clear over that color, shape it up just right, get the temperature just right, and we'd be able to draw it out and stretch it clear across the stage to create glass cane. So those of you that are here in the live audience can probably see this. It's not a diagram because these are pieces of glass, but you get the idea. The examples, all these various glass cane or glass sticks that were created. This white one here would be as I was describing, using the white color bar encased in clear and stretched out across the stage. So you can see there's all different types of cane that can be created. One of a really popular one are these twisted canes. So real quickly, how you do those is you create the single glass stick and then pick up about 4 or 5 of those, encase them in clear, draw them across the stage. But as you do that, each artist on either side twists in the opposite direction and spiralizes those lines to create the twisted cane. And then if you wanted to take your twisted cane and create a piece, like this giant goblet in front of me, what you would do is lay the twisted cane out on a plate, preheat them, roll them up on the surface of a clear bubble, and you'd be able to create whatever form you'd like. So that's kind of one way that you can work with glass cane. We're of course going to make a cinnamon stick. I really like to make glass birthday cakes, so that's how I create all the little candles for the center. Another thing that we would do through that process of pulling glass cane would be to create murrini. So this piece here was actually created using murrini. So clear glass with yellow encasing the clear was drawn across the stage. It was pre-shaped to create the hexagons, and then drawn across the stage, chopped up into little slices like chips, and then laid out onto a kiln plate or a kiln shelf to be preheated. So with murrini, it's kind of like quilting. You patch the little design together, and then you can heat that up, and it becomes sort of a tile. You fuse that all together so that it's a sheet of your pattern, and then you can roll that up on the outside of a bubble and create a piece like that kind of honeycomb vase that we have down here on the stage. So that's one way that you can use the glass color and that cane pulling technique to create cane pieces, or slice it up to create murrini. Lots of exciting stuff that you can do with glass. The color patterning techniques can go on and on. Something I think is really nice about glass color and interesting to most folks is that glass color won't blend like paint color blends together. So if you made a piece of glass that was white and blue, or dark blue, you wouldn't end up with a sky blue form. The color would remain separate. And the ways that we can kind of play with combining colors in glass is to work with transparent color. Start with white and apply transparent blue and then transparent purple. And you're going to end up with 5 or 6 different colors, but it's not because they blend, it's simply because you can see through the transparents to the ones underneath. And so that's something that's a lot of fun to play with to create color fades, but it's also really nice that the glass color doesn't blend. So these 2 pumpkins are actually a really nice example of some color fading done with the crushed up glass color or frit. And you can see this one has the white in the background and all those various blues. So we've got a lot of different color techniques that we can play with. I don't see, not a grand example of the color not blending, but of course the orange on top isn't affected by the black underneath, and you can kind of see designs like that. So lots of different coloring techniques that we can play with in the hot shop. And of course, along with the twisted cane, you can see these pieces here were created using one color underneath and a transparent over top to create these canes that were then rolled up on the outside of the bubble. Special side note about the objects here on this bench, they were all done during another one of our live stream engagements. And so our live streams are, of course, being streamed actively as they happen, but on the museum's YouTube channel, they're available like a library of glassmaking demos. So if you really love one of these objects that you see here today, you have the opportunity to go watch it being made online, as well as check out some of our other demos, or, you know, it's pretty early in this demonstration, but if you showed up halfway through, you'd be able to see the whole thing. It's a really great resource or source of entertainment available online if you'd like to see some more glass making. And then just in case anybody doesn't know, speaking of glass making online, there is a glass making reality TV show on Netflix called Blown Away. So if you haven't heard of it, you could check that out. It's pretty exciting. The glass makers from the Corning Museum of Glass actually participate in the end of the competition, working as an assistant with the last 2 contestants for that final piece that they'll create. It's a fun show to watch. It's, you know, they have all sorts of reality TV shows nowadays, and now we've got a glass one. So it's filmed in Canada, but one of the, or part of the prize package is a residency here at the Corning Museum of Glass. And so we're connected with the program in that way. We are part of the prize package, and we assist in those final pieces created on the show. And of course, the internet itself is going to have plenty of videos and resources about glass making. Another virtual resource that I always like to point out is our research library here at the Corning Museum of Glass. It's called the Rakow Research Library. That's RAKOW. And if you have a question about glass, you can use this as a resource when you're here in Corning with us, because it's over there across the parking lot. But you can also use it from your home. On the museum's website, there's a button that says Research. If you click on that, you can then click on the next link that says Ask a Glass Question. This allows you to email our librarians directly. You can even incorporate a photo you took with your cell phone while you were here if you're really wondering how was this piece created, or more about the artist that created that particular piece or something like that. You can include an image. But it's a great resource available to those of us that are here in Corning, New York, and those of us around the world. It is the largest library dedicated completely to glass. So that's a great resource to have here in Corning, New York as well. I'm going to check in on our cinnamon stick. Great camera angle. Oh, that's nice. So it looks like he flattened it out and twisted it just like a real cinnamon stick. Excellent. Chris is a really talented glass maker, as I was explaining before. You know, this is a really challenging medium to work with. But hi.
Have you seen the drill with the tungsten in it?
I have. I hit it on the tool deck. It's very hidden right on the tool deck. So as I was saying, we've got lots of bells and whistles down here, various tools to work with, and if you can think of something you want to create, we can often figure out how to do it. And luckily, someone knows where she hid the tool. So we'll get that drill over there involved later on. That's going to come in handy. All right, so I'm not sure exactly what's going to come next. I think we're going to make one more part. Did anybody have any quick questions about anything I've discussed so far? Don't worry, I've got lots of time with you, and I love to just keep talking and talking and talking. So stunned silence is good too. All right. And of course, if you are watching virtually, you can ask questions online through the chat box. And Amanda will reach out to me if she doesn't know the answer, and we'll get those questions answered for you. And if neither one of us knows, we're going to send you to that research library, but we'll figure it out one way or the other. So feel free to ask questions during the show, after the show, online during the show, email our librarians. We're here to really share glass with the world, teach everyone about glass, and of course we are very lucky to share something that we love. So the next piece that we're going to create, I'm pretty sure, is going to be that whipped cream up at the top of the vessel, but it's looking to me like that's going to include a little bit of blown glass. So we'll do this a couple times, but this time I think is going to be really excellent because you're going to be able to see the bubble make its way out into the glass. So we are blowing glass in a little bit of a funny way, but essentially, Chris has collected glass from the melting furnace. He's going to center it, shape it, and then send air out into that solid mass of glass to create a hollow core or our starter bubble. And if you blink, you will miss it. It happens very quickly. The pipe itself is a hollow stainless steel tube called a blowpipe. Basically a big metal straw so that we can send air out into the solid glass. Now, I discussed a lot about how temperature affects how the glass is going to move. The pipes and the solid irons that we work with are preheated to about half the temperature of the glass, which means the moment we collect the glass on the end of the furnace, the pipe itself starts pulling heat out of the glass. So right across the face of the blowpipe, there's surface tension created. That glass is colder, so it requires a little bit of extra air pressure to get that air bubble started out into the molten glass. But once it crosses that threshold right off the face of the pipe, it expands really quickly because the rest of the glass floating off the end of the iron there is still really, really close to that 2100 degree temperature point. We've shaped it, so we've cooled the exterior of the shell, and that's how we control the shape of the bubble as it expands. But that core is still just fluid molten glass moving very easily. So it does require a little bit of pressure to get that bubble started, but once it crosses that sort of gate, if you will, at the top of the pipe, it expands really quickly. A little bit like, blowing up a birthday balloon. It's kind of hard to get started and then it goes easily. Not similar physics at all, but just to kind of give you an idea that you might relate to. So traditionally, for thousands of years, glassmakers would simply blow into the end of the pipe to create those air bubbles in the glass. We would use a technique called capping the pipe to build that air pressure up to get that first bubble going. So we'd have fluid molten glass on the end of the iron, blow into the pipe very quickly, and then place our thumb on the mouthpiece of the pipe. It's called capping the pipe. It traps the air inside, it builds up pressure, and makes its way out into the glass. We're blowing glass with our auto inflation system because of our masks. Now, I did know we were making a pumpkin piece, so I definitely wore one of my pumpkin masks today. But either way, I can't blow glass through it. So we rely on this auto inflation system. The cap goes on the end of the pipe, the tube is hooked up to our compressed air system, and there's a foot pedal on the floor in front of Chris. So we are essentially, and have been now for about a year and a half, except for one shining month when we didn't have to, blowing glass with our toes. The system itself is a great tool in the hot shop in a lot of ways. There are some moments where you really wish you could just blow into the end of the pipe like we've always done. But more or less, it got us back in the hot shop, got us back doing our demos for our guests and doing what we love. So we are grateful for it. Something else that was really nice about this, the auto inflation system isn't completely new to glassmaking, but this one was developed here in Corning, New York by our technicians. And once they sorted out how to make it, they actually posted the designs online so that glassmakers all over the world would have access to it, be able to use it in their shops and studios, and continue to blow glass as safely as possible. Did you have a question?
Yeah, what type of glass are we using? Is it full spectrum?
It is, yes. I jumped over that when I was talking to about the garage because I was like, that's a long story. I'll delve into that soon, probably. So the question that we had online, so I'll include everybody together, is what type of glass are we using? And specifically, we were asked if it was still spectrum. So the glass that we've got in the melting furnace is soda lime glass, and these are the 3 ingredients here. But the big one is silica sand, and it makes up about 70% of the mixture for our glass. Soda ash is added as the flux, which lowers the melting point of the pure silica to roughly around that 22,000-ish degree temperature point, so we can keep it fluid and molten at a lower temperature and use a little bit less energy. And that actually would make glass for us that we'd be able to collect from the furnace, create works, cool down, take a look at. However, that glass would deteriorate over time. It would actually slowly absorb moisture from the air and start to break down. To stabilize the mixture of soda ash and silica sand, limestone is added. And so the glass we work with is called soda lime glass. The specific brand or kind of soda lime glass that we use is called Spectrum, and that's just the brand that we purchase. But that glass is designed to stay hotter longer in the hot shop so that we have time to do all this manipulating and shaping of the glass. Soda lime glass itself is actually a really common form of this material. Your eyeglasses are soda lime glass, these window panes, the drinking glasses in your home, the pickle jars in the grocery store. It's all soda lime glass. Glass can be designed to serve a specific purpose. So our glass is designed to hold onto that heat so that we can do all that manipulating and shaping. And so the question was simply, do we still use that same soft glass? Is it Spectrum? And so that's sort of the longer-winded answer, but that way I could explain to you folks what glass actually is. So I'm going to jump in over here real quickly. We are creating the whipped cream topping, and hopefully the camera can sort of get in there. You can get the idea a bit. I mentioned earlier that the colored glass over here is actually powder. So Chris has poured into a sifter the white powdered glass, and he's just tapping the side like you would to send flour through the sifter to put a coating of that color over the surface of the clear sculpture of whipped cream that he created. And so that's one way that we can colorize the glass. I have an example of the powdered glass, but I'd have to wander off stage to get it, but don't worry about me because I'm going to do it. Oh, there's a great camera angle, so you can really see what's going on. With any application of the glass color, if it's powder or that crushed up glass frit, you're dealing with teeny tiny little polka dots. So if you want to have a good coating of that color, you definitely want to get 1 or 2, maybe 3 coats, depending on the design. And so that's why they're headed back and forth. The color is applied to the piece successfully because of temperature. Temperature, temperature, temperature. What happens to the sculpture that Chris created, the whipped cream shape, we have to have the core of that cooled down because you don't really want it to change shape, but the surface heated. So he let kind of the whole thing cool down a little bit, passed it over to Alex. She's using the reheating furnace to warm up just the surface, and then heading over to our powder booth. That's a special powder booth. It's got ventilation so that we're not breathing in any glass dust. And they're applying multiple layers to make sure they get a nice even coat. But once you get one layer of powder, you can't keep just, stacking it up. You need to reheat that layer so you can get more of it to stick, because as I said, it's all about temperature. So looks like, I wasn't counting because I walked off stage, but a couple coats of that nice white color. And now we've got a wonderful whipped cream. That looks delicious, Chris. I'm not going to eat it though.
Yeah, just a couple
Definitely
rolls on
not.
there, just make sure there's some color on the table.
Okay, so now Chris is going to let that stabilize. And what we're going to do with this is actually transfer it to a secondary iron. Later on in the process, we're going to break the whipped cream free from that secondary iron. But we don't want to leave a big chunk of clear glass on the end of our whipped cream design. So Alex is actually going to colorize that connecting rod as well. So just quickly, we're going to probably work with a lot of the powdered color, but I got this piece out. This was created, I wish I knew, but I'm pretty sure that it was either Catherine Ayers or Helen Tegler, two other glass makers that work with us. However, I wanted to point out this because they use the glass powder to create the color on our astronaut here. So you might be able to see this surface is matte. It's actually textured, but you also can see right where the astronaut is, you can see that gray. Now I like to think they thought of that and that's just the shadow? I don't know how many shadows are on the moon exactly, but anyway, for cartoon purposes, that's our shadow. But what that really is where they had to heat up the surface of the moon to be able to attach the astronaut. So the color was melted down a little bit extra here, and you lose that matte texture, and it comes more to a shine. So that's an effect that can happen with the powdered glass color, but I just wanted to get this out. He's very popular. Everybody loves this astronaut. But I wanted to get it out so you could see an example of that powdered coloration up close, because we won't be able to take a look at any of the pieces that we create today to make our pumpkin spice design. All glass, because of that issue of thermal shock, will have to cool very slowly. So we will, of course, have this piece as a star on the museum's social media, so you can definitely check that out. What have we got? We've got Facebook. We've probably got them all, right? Instagram and Twitter. So you definitely won't be able to miss getting to see an image of this piece if you so desired. So you'd be able to have access to that online, but sometimes it's a little bit easier to see if you can see it in real life. So I got that example out for us. So now we've transferred that whipped cream to a secondary iron. It's just going to be a handle, and that'll come into play as I was explaining later on. The team actually, before the demonstration today, Chris is the lead artist for Gaffer, so how it's going to happen is really up to him. But because we all have glass making experience, we kind of discussed, how are we going to apply that, what's going to look best, all those things. And our final decision was to set it up so that we could heat up the base of the whipped cream and sit it down in our mug. So he's just going to do a little prep work to make sure that that's going to sit nicely. I don't know what Alex is up to. And we'll add that to our collection of pieces in the garage. You'll see us use both of these torches throughout the demonstration, but we've got the two of them to serve different purposes. So that small one is a very precise heat. We can heat up very specific sections of the piece. It's also a superheater. That torch can, I think it's somewhere around 4,000 degrees Fahrenheit, so it's super hot. The larger flame that's just back there kind of blowing in the wind or the air conditioning, these things down here are actually, this is a glass blowing studio luxury. These are air conditioning vents. It's really nice. So that the flame's flapping in the air conditioning, if you will. But we call that the fluffy torch because it's fluffy, but it also casts a lower temperature heat, but it does just help us maintain temperature in the glass through the process. So we'll use that later on, usually with larger pieces. And as I said, that's a propane torch. This one kind of comes from the flame working studio, and it was adapted to be used here in the hot shop to give us this more precise flame.
This is going in the garage, Jamie, and then we're going to do an overlay to start this up.
Ooh, okay. So Chris was just updating me a little bit. As predicted, of course, that whipped cream is going to go in the garage. Oh, did you put the color bar in the garage? Okay. And then, what color you got?
Opal yellow.
All right, so this will go in the garage, and then we're going to start the main part of the form, or our, I'm going to call it the pumpkin mug. And typically with the color bar, we have a color box. It's essentially another pickup oven, but you can see inside of it here, we set the color bar in these little trays, shut the doors, turn the oven on, and it preheats the color bar for us so that we can draw it out and incorporate it into our pieces. Now the pickup oven, the color box, the garage, they're all basically the same thing, just kind of different configurations and setups. But what Chris did this morning was actually choose the color bar that he wanted to work with, and he stuck it in the garage. Preheats it just the same. So Alex has already gotten started on that. She told me the whole thing, but it's a yellow. It's a yellowish orange color. So the color bar, just like this white piece, Chris decides how much of it he wants to use. And now this is something that I distinctly remember not really understanding when I first started working in glass. How do you know how much color bar you need to make whatever piece you're making? And the truth of the matter is you just figure it out over time. But this little piece of color, this is the tricky part. Glass color is very densely colored. This looks like black across the room, but what color it actually is this really bright, almost neon green. So you can imagine you don't need a whole lot of this to create a piece like this. You're going to stretch the color out really far. So this piece here, I'd say you can make at least 2 of these bowls with just this tiny piece of glass color. And so determining how much color you need just comes from experience. And Chris, of course, decided how large he wanted to make this piece. He needed to do that because we're pre-making all these different pieces that come together. And so he set up whatever size color bar he was going to need. So I described the glass itself, our soda lime glass, and our 3 main ingredients. To create the colors in glass, different metal oxides or chlorides are added when the glass is still in its powdered form. So when it's still in this state, those different metal oxides and chlorides are added before it's melted down to create the color. If you missed the starter bubble earlier, here comes another one. It's probably already there now. I heard the foot clicks. So the glass itself, when it's in that powdered form, it goes into a melting furnace, and it actually goes through a chemical change to become glass. Melting down glass from this raw powdered form requires a bit of babysitting and higher temperatures than 2100 degrees Fahrenheit. You sort of have to put a little bit of the powder in, make sure it's all the way melted down before you can add more. So if you filled your furnace all the way, it's just not going to work. It's a bad idea. So it requires a lot more attention. Also, you're working with powdered silica, which is actually bad for your health. It's bad to breathe in, all that. So the spectrum glass that we get that's pre-melted, it actually comes to us like this, and we love it. It's glass that has already been pulled through that chemical change and is now just glass. These little cubes are safer, cleaner, and easier, and require less energy to turn into a pool of molten glass. Actually, yesterday we threw, I think, 150 pounds into the melting furnace, and then we just went home. And it melts down overnight at that 2100 degree temperature point, no problem, and we can come back in and work with that molten glass this morning. So I'll bounce back and forth a little bit. This is a color drop or color overlay. The core bubble here is clear glass. Chris has let it cool down, so that's sturdy and rigid. The colored glass has been warmed up so that it's fluid and molten and moving around. We'll apply it to the top of that bubble, like a little hat of color, and then Chris will use various tools to push it back over that clear bubble. So it's kind of like, pulling your sock up over your foot, more or less, to create a nice even coat of color on the surface of the piece. So he might sit back down and use the hand tools. He may use that table, which is why I was wiping it off to make sure there was no stray other color or anything that would get stuck to the piece. The glass color comes to us in all different forms, the powder, the little crushed up bits, or the color bar. And it's always going to create a different aesthetic. Our ghost here at the center stage, that is solid color bar. So we get that nice even jacket of color. The frit creates somewhat of a speckled pattern. So right beside the ghost, we've got this vessel here, and this is of course a combination of multiple colors, but even if it was a single color, when you look up close at a vessel, you're always going to be able to see that it has a series of tiny polka dots to create that color. So it all depends on your aesthetic, and of course we talked about how the powder looks. So the idea with a color drop or color overlay is that temperature control. There's a lot of heat packed into the color when we apply it. It's soft enough, we cut right through it, no problem. And then ideally we want to get it pressed back over that clear bubble before we heat up the clear bubble underneath. So Chris goes back for a reheat, presses pretty swiftly to push that color bar back over the clear bubble. And ideally that's going to happen in 1 or 2 heats, because after that you're heating it up so many times you're going to get heat into that clear bubble. So we've got that nice even jacket of color established on our piece. We'll do a little bit more centering. He might inflate it a little bit more, and we're definitely going to need a little bit more glass. I saw some conversation going on, and of course the pumpkin's got lots of different colors on it, and we're working with that powdered glass to create a really nice texture for our piece. So I'm not sure how we're going to get all the color on, but we're certainly going to gather up a little bit more glass. So back to creating the glass color. When it's in the powdered form like this, that's when they add the different metal oxides and chlorides, and then that powdered mixture is melted down. The glass is drawn out and shaped into these color bars, or drawn out and put into a tumbler to be crushed up to the various sizes. We don't make our clear or our colored glass here at the museum. We don't mess with any of that. We sit comfortably at a table and flip through a catalog, or I guess nowadays flip through a website, and choose our favorite colors and order them. Our color mainly comes from a glass color company in Germany called Reichenbach, and they've got upwards of 200 colors available for us to choose from. There's a handful of other color companies in the world. In Murano, there are color recipes that are guarded family secrets, and you can only get those colors at that particular glass company or within that glass family. So many different colors created in glass, as I said, through the addition of metals. So briefly, the pinks are actually made with gold chloride. I always mix up the oranges and the yellows, but cadmium and selenium are there. Greens with iron. Copper makes aquamarine. Cobalt makes the royal blue. Manganese makes purple. Black glass does not exist. It's just really dense purple. It's a little tidbit there. But as you can see, based on the plethora of pumpkins over there, a little bit further down on the stage, we have lots and lots of different beautiful colors to choose from. And as I mentioned earlier, the colors don't blend together, which is nice, but some colors do chemically react to one another, or they are reducing or striking colors. I could go on and on. But basically, the short of it is that the colors that react to one another, it looks kind of like they do blend, but they usually create a third completely different color. The reducing or striking colors will go on one color, go through the creation process, and then end up another color. But we can predict that change, so we know what that striking color is going to become. Colors that reduce are shiny, and we just do something at the end of the process that pulls some of the metals present in the color to the surface, and we can create somewhat of a shine. And I know I've got some of them. I think what we've got going on a lot is a color called iris gold, And so that's the one on the pumpkin stems here that has that sheen or shine to it. Kind of looks a little bit like that shininess of an oil slick where you see that rainbow, except it's in beautiful glass and not a terrifying spill in your driveway. Now, in order to collect, yes?
Got a hello from a friend.
A hello from a friend.
Heather says hi to you, Chris.
Aww. Heather says hi, Chris. Hi, Heather. Alex, say hi, Heather. She's really cool. Alex. Psst, Alex. Alex says hi too, Heather. So Heather is one of our glass makers, I would say, from our Corning glass family, who just recently set off to become part of the Texas glass family. And so she's on an exciting new adventure, moved near a few other glass makers that we know and love, and we do hope that her and one of our other glass family members, G. Brian, are having a super great time. Thinking of you both. Big hearts. Alex, you forgot to say hi to Heather. Just wave to Heather. Very good. All right, so while I was getting all emotional, we've taken another gather of glass from the melting furnace. So hopefully you saw it while I was distracted. Can I play the video while we're doing a live stream? Okay, cool. I don't know where it is here. Oh, maybe our friends in the, I don't want to push the wrong button. There we go, great, thank you. So this is our gathering animation that shows you the process. We've got a pot or a crucible inside the melting furnace. Whatever setup we have, we plunge that below the molten surface, rotate nice and evenly, and collect out that additional layer of glass. So that just gives you a little window. We made that nice animation a handful of years ago, but that really kind of shows you that gathering process. Our melting furnace holds up to 1,000 pounds of clear molten glass when it's full. And as I said, we threw about 150 pounds in there yesterday, so it's pretty high up there. But it is a huge crucible or pot on the inside. Something about these furnaces is once we turn them on, they're on. This one's been on since 2015, and I have been hearing rumors that we might turn it off sometime this winter, probably in January and February when there's not many people around. It's freezing and snowing every single day. But we only turn these furnaces down if we plan to repair them, or sometimes they force us to repair them. But this one's been going since 2015. And one of the big things that happens to a furnace is that glass is actually corrosive, and it starts to chew away at that bowl or crucible from the moment we turn it on. So when we do turn it off, especially over all of those years that have passed by, it's going to kind of have a few pits in it, and you can usually stretch the life of a crucible, fill that in, and turn it back up, and you can get away with a few more years. But we'll take a look at what's going on in there once we cool it down. So the melting furnace is always on, always got molten glass in it. We sometimes turn it up a little bit so that we can get the glass to move like water if we want to do some casting, but pretty much it's always hovering around 2100 degrees Fahrenheit. The reheating furnaces, the pickup ovens, the garage, all of that will shut off and only turn on when we're going to use them. The furnaces, the reheating units, they take about 45 minutes or an hour to heat up in the morning. The giant one off to the left, that's the size of, lovingly everybody's first studio apartment. That one takes about an hour and 45 minutes to heat up. And we've used it a few times, believe it or not. We can make some pretty substantial glass using that furnace. But those ones will turn on and off at the end of the day. We have there's actually a bed of something like sand, it's called grout, in the bottom of these furnaces. So if we happen to drop a piece of glass inside of that furnace, we can, once it cools down at the end of the day, make sure we get all of that glass out of the furnace because it will start to chew away and eat at the brickwork inside of that furnace as well. So, nice stuff. Not anything as fun and dramatic as, the acid dripping through the decks of the alien ship, but over time it does create a little bit of damage. So for that gathering process that we just did, I just want to mention a little bit more about the temperature control of the glass. Chris made the starter bubble, they applied the color, they let it get cold so they could gather over it, and that little starter bubble could support the weight and heat of the second gather of glass. This is really important. If you don't do that correctly, you can go into that melting furnace, plunge your starter bubble, color or not, below that melting or molten surface, and start turning, and it heats up way too fast and just starts drawing off the end of the iron and contaminating your pot of molten glass. So that is a really important step in that process of building up the material you want to create the piece you want, which is another thing that comes with time. How much do I need to gather to make a piece that's whatever size? All comes through experience. Now, 2 gathers of glass looks like it's going to be enough for the mug that we're making today. 2 gathers of glass was plenty for the rainbow, except for the honeycomb one, but the whole rainbow. All those pieces were made with just 2 gathers of glass. And so the 2 gathers will be enough for our pumpkin spice mug. Now, Chris just used one of our optic molds, so you can see here we've got so many of them. This is another one that's similar to the one that Chris used. You can see the texture there on the camera, but we plunge the bubble into a mold like this, inflate it, it pushes out into the side walls of the mold itself, and because it fills in all this available space, it takes on the surface texture of the mold. This particular mold, and ones just like it, are used quite a bit in the fall season. As you can see, it's how we create the raised ridges of our glass pumpkins. The idea with this mold is that the cold metal of the mold chills the skin or the surface of the glass in place, and as long as we don't heat it up too many times, we will not lose that surface texture and we'll have it there present to the final product. So before we use one of our optic molds, we always take a good strong heat so that we've got temperature really good and soaked all the way through our entire mass of glass before we go into that mold, so that we can rely on that internal heat to get all that movement we want in the glass to expand it without having to heat up the surface too many times. Just like, a chocolate bar would turn into a puddle if you left it inside your car and it got really hot, our glass will soften and round off as it's heated. So if we heat this up too many times, we'll lose that surface texture. These molds, of course, are not finishing molds. There is no, instant soda bottle in any of these molds. They're all surface texture. So the piece itself, or the shape, is going to be up to the glass artist making the form. Now, something that happened while I was telling the story of the molds is a very important step, using tools called the jacks. So this is a pair of jacks. Chris squeezed a constriction line into the top of the bubble right off the end of the pipe. That constriction line is really important. It goes into every piece that we create, whether it's a Western cowboy ghost, a glass fish, a bowl, a vase, or a pumpkin spice mug. It's always going to get a constriction line. We sometimes call that line the jack line because we make it with the jacks. Whatever you call it, we need it. It's going to be our break-off point for the piece. In order to separate this bubble from the blowpipe, we are going to crack and break it right along that constriction or jack line. The indentation that's created sets up a structural weakness in the glass, very similar to the creases in a candy bar. The little, the Kit Kats or the little squares of chocolate snap apart so easily because of that indentation. Same idea with the glass. We're also going to couple that with temperature control, and that will also be something I'll explain a little bit better once we get there. We have a lot of break-off points involved in this piece, mainly that constriction line or jack line, but also with all of the various parts that we created and put in the garage, that's how we're going to add them onto the piece as well. Now the end of the bubble there, that's going to be the base of our finished vessel. So there's lots of ways to finish up the bottom of the piece. We can simply flatten it, which is what's going to happen to our pumpkin mug, I'm pretty sure. Yep, check the design. That's how we finish this piece. But you can also see you can add a stem or a foot, a stem and a foot, or just a solid foot. Lots of options there. There's lots of different ways to finish up the piece. But of course, we are creating this form to a specific design Typically, Chris, Alex, or I would make that decision and finish it any way we'd like. Because we're working in the color, you can really obviously see where the heat is in the glass. What Chris did was localize the heat just to the very bottom of the bubble so that he could flatten up just that part of the piece, and the side walls aren't going to change shape on him. So that's, again, more examples of how we use temperature to control exactly how the glass is going to move. And I also talked about it before, but you saw he used the torch to specifically heat up just that section. He could use the torch, he could use the reheating furnace. The torch helps to be a little bit more precise and make sure that we don't have any movement in the side walls as we flatten up the bottom of that form. Now, because this piece is a sculptural piece with a lot of other elements, we're also using a lot of measurements. You just saw Chris use a set of calipers that he probably measured off of his original design to make sure essentially that once we start assembling this piece, all of our pre-made parts are going to be the right size and they're going to come together. And now for the drill. So for those of you that were with us when we were looking for that, here's how we'll use it. And for those of you who just joined us, essentially we're going to use a drill to sculpt or manipulate the glass. So on the end of the drill we have a tungsten rod. He's using the torch to heat that. And what we want to do is put a teeny tiny little hole right into the bottom of the mug. There's lots of reasons to set a hole into a piece that we're creating. In the case of our pumpkin spice and everything nice mug, the reason is that we don't want to essentially trap an atmosphere. We want to make sure that there's some way for the air to escape. This is important as we finish up the piece. We want air to be able to escape so that as we heat and change the temperature of the glass, we don't have any issues with it, maybe collapsing or expanding in ways we don't want. And also, once the piece is completed, it's ideal to have that kind of little bit of ventilation in any closed form. Another reason that we might use that tungsten rod to puncture holes in the glass is if Chris wanted to transfer this piece to another iron. If we were going through this process, we would use another blowpipe. We wanted to further be able to inflate the top of a sculpture. We would put that little hole in, put a collar on the end of a pipe, connect it so that it was still essentially open, and we could send air out into the glass. And so that's probably getting way ahead of myself on that one, but in any event, there's lots of different reasons that we would set that hole into the glass using the tungsten rod and the drill. For this piece, it's just going to serve that ventilation purposes and make sure that we don't create a trapped atmosphere. What we're going to do with the piece now is transfer it to a secondary iron called the Punty. Alex set that up. I thought you were dancing. I was like, oh, this is an exciting punny. She wasn't dancing. She was stepping on a foot pedal back here to send water up out of that pipe cooler to cool down the metal iron. So she's created a punty. It's a little bit of glass on the end of one of our solid irons shaped up into a Q-tip or a dome shape, and we're going to attach that to the bottom center of the piece. Hot glass sticks very readily to other hot glass, no problem there, but we don't want the punty to be too warm because we do want to break it free later on. If it's too warm, it will fully fuse or kind of completely melt to the bottom of the piece, and it'll be a bit of a challenge to get it off of the base. We don't want it to be too cold either, or it's not going to stick properly. All of the connection points in glass are very heavily reliant on the temperature at which they were applied to the piece. So if the bottom of the piece or the end of the punty are too cold, when we make this connection point, it won't be very strong, and it will break free before we're ready. So again, years of experience and practice. Lots of sad moments where stuff goes wrong and ends up on the floor in all of our glassmaking histories. But now relying on our years of experience and familiarity working with the material, we can kind of gauge the heat in the glass, and we're able to separate it from the pipe, keep it connected to that punty iron and successfully transfer the piece so that we then have access to the opening or the top of the form and we can complete it. So in order to be a good glass maker, you have to develop your skill as a good glass breaker. To be able to break the glass in a controlled manner, again, lots of practice. It is very easy for the transfer process to go wrong because it is possible for any of those temperatures to be incorrect and for the piece to break and fall on the floor. It's possible to transfer the piece successfully and then to head to the reheating furnace, Alex. Start to heat it up. It's heated up too quickly and it cracks and breaks. So lots of things can go wrong in that moment. I'm having way too much fun at work. What's going on?
Let you know, we're gonna need it in a few minutes. You'll flash that.
Okay.
Watch out for some whipped cream.
I love this conversation. Heat up the leaf, but watch out for the whipped cream in there. Okay, excellent. So Alex was just letting me know that I'm going to help out soon.
I forgot about the lip wrap. We're going to do that a little differently. We will do the lip wrap, but I got to sink this in first.
Yeah, that's what I meant earlier.
Yeah, thank you. You're right.
We can almost do it after the whipped cream.
We'll do it before we put that on there, but I'm just going to, I got to make this right first.
All right. Sip of water, safety glasses on, ready to join the team. So after we transfer a piece, we do a pretty significant reheat because in order to break the piece free from the blowpipe, we have to get it close to that threshold for cracking and breaking or thermal shock, which is roughly about 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So that reheat, right after we transfer it, we're bringing it back up to a workable temperature closer to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. So it usually takes a bit of time. These heats where the entire piece goes into the reheating unit, those are called flash heats. And this is just enough to maintain the temperature of the entire form, keep that honey connection warm enough so that it doesn't fracture before we're ready. And so while we focus our attention to heating up the top of our mug, we'll take those overall heats just to help maintain the temperature of the entire form and that connection point. So Chris is actually setting what I'm going to call a whipped cream bowl into the top of the mug by rolling the lip not back onto itself, but kind of back into the vessel. We have quite a few pieces that have rolled lips, but typically we start to open them up like this and fold them back onto the shoulder. So halfway, whole way. And you can see it doubles up the color, adds a nice aesthetic touch. I love doing that just because it's kind of challenging and it's super fun. And I also really like the way that that looks.
Oh yeah, you can do the lip wrap too. Sorry.
But I'm going to say that's the first time I've seen somebody fold it inside to create a bowl. But U-Design-Its are really fun because of that, because it's always, you know, a design that we didn't think of. So it's something new when we figure out how to make it. Speaking of our U-Design-It program, for anybody who wasn't here right at the beginning, this program is exactly as it sounds. You design these pieces. So what we're going to do is every other week, I think maybe through the winter, we're going to post a You Design It, We Make It live stream. You can participate in this by going to the museum's website. Across the top of the website, there's a bunch of words. You want the one that says glass making. And then once you click on that, on the left-hand side, you'll see that You Design It, We Make It button. Another shorter way, go to the museum's website, check out that search bar, just write You Design It. And then it's the first thing that pops up. I checked that out this morning so that I could share that with you folks. But once you get there, the theme for each You Design It will be posted. This theme was pumpkin spice and everything nice. And then you'll be able to submit your drawing or your illustration, and then we'll choose one of them and create it during a live stream just like this. So for those of you watching virtually, you can participate in the future. For everybody here at the museum, you can participate in the future. So it's, again, a great kind of way to connect and outreach with our community here at the museum and around the world. And that's kind of where the hot glass demonstration program grew from. We wanted to share glass with the world. So our You Design It, We Make It program is something that's a lot of fun, and it's actually been on hiatus for reasons of masks and trying not to be so involved with each other, sadly. But we're bringing it back, and we've done it virtually. This way, everybody can participate, and we can all do that safely. This is a lip wrap, exactly as it sounds. At the right shape and heat, we can stretch glass around the lip of the piece to add that additional color element. Side notes that are interesting: the transfer process is something that cannot be done by machine, only handmade glass. The mark will be the Punty mark on the bottom of the form, so you can see that on vessels. Sometimes it's polished away and you won't see it, so it's not a sure sign. But the lip wrap, especially, don't have a lot of examples of lip wraps, but the lip wrap in a different color, that is an absolutely sure sign of handmade glass. That is not done or can't be done by machine yet, I guess. But, you know, for now, only real live human glass blowers can add those wraps to the piece. Did you have a question? Every piece we make is priceless. Yeah, I don't know the answer to that one either. Yeah. So the question online was just what was the most expensive piece we ever made for sale or charity? And yeah, the answer is well, at least Amanda and I don't really know the answer to that one. And so the hilarious answer is it's all priceless. So sorry, our virtual friend, but don't know that one. I'd say that one over there that looks pretty expensive.
Yeah.
The ghost is really one of my favorites. Or the goblet like that, that's elaborate. All right, so we've got our colored lip wrap added to the piece. And I believe we're going to start now to incorporate some of our garage elements. Yes. So the first thing that we're going to add to our design is our leaf. And I'm going to get the leaf and watch out for the whipped cream. Got it. I got my doors open. Beautiful. So lucky for me, over here with our garage unit, I have got a reheating furnace right close by. The garage holds these pre-made parts right at the temperature threshold for thermal shock. So right when we remove them from the garage, we immediately want to get them to a heat source so that they don't get too cold from being out in the open air. Yep. Yep. That's a beautiful leaf, Christopher. Isn't that nice? All right. So Chris used the teeny torch to specifically heat the very bottom of the leaf. All right. This way it would have a little bit of an advantage. It would be in the lead to heat up, because that's the part of the leaf that Chris wanted to be the hottest for the application on the mug. So that's our touchdown point. Temperature, super key in every step of the way. He uses that hot torch going all the way around the base of the leaf to make sure that it's fully fused. Gotta watch out in the hot shop. Yes?
Get the whipped cream moved over to the hot side in the garage, please.
Yes.
Just be very careful with it. It's very delicate.
Okay. Oh, good. Bring it up.
much down just yet. I'm gonna work a little heat in there, and then I'll stir it.
I would say, okay, so the question is, how often do we replace one of our blowpipes? And my answer to that would simply be, it depends on how you treat the tools that you have. If it gets dropped on the floor, it won't be straight anymore. We can straighten them, but that's a bit of a process. And so I don't really know how often we replace our blowpipes, but just like any tool for any craft form, I would say it all depends on how well you take care of it. So another note about how the garage works, it has two garage bays, if you will. The one closest to the heat source is of course a little hotter, and the one further away is a little cooler. So right before we introduce whatever piece we're going to introduce next to one of our reheating units, we move it from the quote-unquote cold side of the garage to the hot side to slowly, incrementally bring up the temperature of the piece of glass. So that's what my job is right now. I'm just doing a little bit of pre-warming of our whipped cream before we bring it out of a 1,022 degree furnace, or excuse me, garage, and introduce it to a 2,100 degree furnace. Hi, Chris.
There, Jamie, I'm gonna come grab it.
I'm right here until you tell me otherwise. The team is working to flatten the leaf onto the mug. Looks like they've got that. Make sure everything is centered or running straight. That punty connection, if it heats up, it kind of acts a little bit like a hinge. So we'll make sure everything's running straight. You got it? Okay. And then Alex is essentially babysitting. She's making sure that the mug doesn't cool down too fast, but it doesn't get too hot. So she's taking those flash heats. And I'm going to relax now that I'm not responsible for that whipped cream. Move the other one over.
Move that cinnamon stick over to the left side.
Do you want me to wait until you say, or nah, just do it? Okay. Yep. All right, so just managing the heat here. We want the base of our whipped cream hot enough so that it's going to stick nice and securely into the top of our mug. Oftentimes we sort of heat the object that we're attaching, not so much the vessel, but it depends on what we're doing and how we want it to look. In the case of the whipped cream, of course, we don't want the cup to move around the whipped cream. But when we apply our cinnamon stick, we actually decided before the demonstration, we'll probably heat up the whipped cream so that the cinnamon stick looks kind of like it's actually plunged into the whipped cream. So it kind of depends on the effect that you are looking for, how you manage that. But either way, it's got to be hot enough. Okay. Moved our cinnamon stick from the cold side of the garage over to the hot side in preparation for its addition to the piece. It's exciting. Lots of friends online. Lots of virtual viewers. All right, so teamwork, of course, is key in glass blowing. I probably said temperature 500 times this morning. The teamwork is a big one, temperature, and then timing. So you're going to hear some communication on the team about that timing. Chris will say, I'm almost ready, 5 seconds, something like that. So the team knows where everybody else in the shop is and they can move forward appropriately.
Our designer, Sarah, is watching, and she says that she's loving the process.
I was just wondering. As I was talking about all of our virtual friends, I was like, I wonder if our designer is watching. And that's why I ran across the room, actually, to look and see her name again, because I didn't want to get it wrong. Whoop, there goes our whipped cream right in there. Chris did not mess around. If you do kind of like try to aim, you know, you can end up psyching yourself out there a little bit. So he just went right for it, got it in there. Great application. So Amanda just shared with me that our designer, Sarah, is watching the demonstration virtually with us, and she's loving it, and she wishes she was here with us. It's always a lot of fun to have our designers with us, and that's something that we used to be able to do before we had to take the program away. We actually had, you know, crayons and markers set up and papers out, and everybody could draw, and we would go choose from the illustrations and announce it over the loudspeaker at the museum, and very often our designer would be right here in the hot shop with us, and that always added to the fun. But it sounds like, as we hope, our designer is happy with the piece, and she's loving watching the process and seeing her design come to life in glass.
Can you bring this over to the powder booth for me?
Sure. The added bonus of our You Design It, We Make It program, yeah, flash and head over, got it, is that our designers actually get to have the pieces. So if you participate in our You Design It program and we choose your design, if you're here, of course, we would hand it to you. But if you're not, we would mail it to you. Do you want to dust the other stuff? Oh my gosh. Ah! Yep. So we wanted to get a good coating of the powder on the little part of the whipped cream where we broke it free from that connection. If you were here earlier, we did set it up so ideally, yep, ideally we wouldn't have that lack of color on the very end of the whipped cream. But I guess maybe we wanted to touch that up and make sure that it was just right. So we went over to our powder booth to get a little bit more of that powdered glass color on the end of our whipped cream. Now when we are doing that, the powder is in a sifter. We're tapping the sifter. Chris, here I come. And so the dust is kind of getting everywhere. Alex, on your right. Oh, you're good. And when we're doing this, a couple, I definitely can't count them, but there's a little bit of powder getting on the side of the mug. So as long as I don't go directly to a heat source, that little dusting isn't going to melt in. And so that's what Chris and I are up to now. We are just brushing off the rest of the mug so that we don't have any rogue bits of powdered colored glass anywhere where we don't want them to be before we heat it up. Because the powdered glass is so fine that basically it's already melted to the surface if we have it where we don't want it. That was nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Ready?
I'm ready.
Okay.
Thank you, Jamie.
Yeah. All right. Okay.
And we've got a question for you.
More questions? Let's go over here where we're away from that fire. Just relaxing over here. I'm gonna just.
Glass sticky, from sticky for optical,
Mm.
or like in the garage.
Okay. So I'm gonna make me remember that in just a second. So while you watched me, hopefully it was a little comical, run across the hot shop with the mug in fear a little bit, you might wonder how, when things are getting crazy, does no one get hit with glass or we don't trip over each other and all that. And it is because we are all hyper aware of where the glass is, and then next to that, where the other glass makers are. So you heard me before I got near Alex. I said, I'm on your right. I know Chris knew where I was. I know Alex didn't know where I was. So we just make sure to communicate with each other, safety first. That's why when Chris let me know I'd be back on the team, got my safety glasses on. So safety first, and we just do a lot of communicating. Also, you know, most of us walk around our own homes in the dark because we know where the furniture is. And I'm telling you, if we mop the floor and move this back 3 inches, somebody's gonna run into it. So we're really aware of where all the furniture is too. But the glass blowers, of course, are mobile, so communication is key. And then our question was, how do we prevent, or why doesn't the glass stick to our optic molds? We've got the glass on the end of metal pipes and punties, and it sticks to that, and it doesn't stick to our optic molds. The reason for that is that the pipes and punties, I don't know if you can see the reddish glow here, probably not, they're preheated to about half the temperature of the glass. Hot glass sticks to hot glass sticks to hot things. So it's going to stick to the hot metal of that pipe, but it doesn't stick to our optic molds because they're cold. They're out here at room temperature, no problem. There are circumstances where the glass will stick to the mold, that being a production setting. If we were making glass pumpkins, I'd say that this particular team of 3, we'd probably be plopping a bubble down into those optic molds every couple of minutes, and therefore it's going to absorb some of that heat every time we put a bubble in it. And so eventually someone's going to put a bubble in it and try to take it out, and they're going to bring the mold with them. And when that happens, you know, you laugh at it, you move on with your day. You just take the metal mold, not with your hands, but with a tool, or you could just take a break. That's great in a production setting. But if you don't have time for that break, you can take the mold, dunk it in a bucket of water, just like the pipe cooler cools down our blowpipes and our solid irons. That cold water will cool down the mold. You know, you can set it on the ground, blow it out with an air hose so there's not droplets of water in it, or put some glass in there so the droplets of water evaporate. You know, dry it out, and then you can just keep going right away. So it kind of resets the mold. And so that is why in our single demos where we use the molds once, we don't get stuck in there. What do we got going on here next? Oh, I think this is our handle. Looks like it has gone into an optic mold as well. This is a solid bit, but we wanted some texture on it. And so Alex went into the same optic mold, or same style optic mold as was used for the mug itself. It creates ridges. Chris asked Alex to twist that as she was drawing it upwards, or he was drawing it upwards. This spiralizes that texture. You can see that in all of our pumpkin stems. We always do that. From across the room, you can see this spiral here. It was the same idea. We plunged a bubble into one of those optic molds. As we inflated it, we twisted it, and we can get this spiral pattern. So now our handle has that spiralized texture that I think was part of the design. The color, glass color, all looks different. So Sarah, your mug's going to look a lot brighter once it cools down. For everybody that's here with us, anything that's hot is going to glow orange. Orange glass often looks brown or like chocolate when it's hot. Everything looks a little different when it's hot in the hot shop. And now we consider the glass cold around 1,000 degrees, but at that temperature point, of course, it's not cold, it's still hot. And the color does not yet reflect that true brilliance that it will once it cools all the way down to room temperature. So all the colors are affected by the heat. White, however, is one of those colors that is not very affected by the heat. You can see it looks bright white. It's going to look bright white once it's cooled down. But all of our greens and oranges and yellows and browns, they're going to brighten up a bit once the glass cools down. And so I'm not sure of the color set into the handle itself, but again, it's going to look different once it cools down. It's hard to read that all in the hot shop. All right, coming together good. So, hey Chris, I've got the cinnamon stick on the hot side. Do you need anything else?
We're going to powder a little bit more first, and then,
Uh-huh.
then I'll have you grab that.
All right, I'll be over here. It's wonderful. Have another sip.
Jamie, can you open up enough room for us to fit in the Oriole over there?
All right, so excellent idea by Chris. As much fun as I had running across the hot shop, we're going to do a little bit more powdering, and then we're going to heat that up using the reheating furnace that we've got right next to our powder booth. I'm going to join the team and just open and close some doors here. That'll be helpful by way of not letting too much heat escape the furnace. But also I want to make sure that there is enough room for the piece to move through those doors safely. All right. So now we need just enough heat to melt that powder on there, so I'm not worried about that. I'm going to go ahead and leave those doors open. Hey Chris, are we? Okay. All right. Little housekeeping. One element that I don't know if that's what we were just doing, but I know that we are doing, is adding a little bit of pumpkin cinnamon spice on top of our whipped cream. So we've got another glass powder color over there that we were going to dust on top of the whipped cream. Sure thing. Are we going to apply that over here at this bench? All right, so I talked about earlier when we bring these pieces together, that will either heat up the form or the object that's coming out of the garage. And for the cinnamon stick and the whipped cream, we're going to heat up the whipped cream so that as we attach the cinnamon stick, it looks like it's actually plunged inside of the whipped cream. All about the details. We did it. It's already there.
Oh, it's the cinnamon stick, sorry.
Oh yeah, the cinnamon stick's gonna happen right here. Live off to the side of the stage. But we've got great camera angles here in the amphitheater. So you might be able to see on the top of our pumpkin spice mug that we've got a... You're fine, I just want to be here in case the cinnamon stick's sticking out sideways or something. You can see the heat in the pumpkin mug. We're going to really super heat up the end of the cinnamon stick and then squish it in there. All right, excellent, nice and comfortable. So now we've got the cinnamon stick attached. It's still moving around right at that joint, so Chris is going to stylize it, stabilize it, etc. And you might have seen he preheated the metal tweezers, because if you remember from the very beginning, every tool we touch to the surface of the glass is going to draw heat out of it. And in this moment, that cinnamon stick is really close to that threshold for cracking and breaking if it's cooled too rapidly. And so we don't want to touch it with any cold metal. I'm just supervising in case you need me, Chris. Alex is suiting up in some of Corning's finest. She is going to take hold of our pumpkin spice and everything nice mug and place it inside of a slow cooling oven called an annealer, so that this piece can cool down very slowly and prevent any of that thermal stress from building up in the glass. All glass has to be annealed or slowly cooled to prevent any of that cracking and breaking from happening. The bigger or thicker the piece is, the longer it takes to cool it down. So this mug, I'm going to say we'll probably do at least a 24-hour cycle on it. The typical size, not the giant pumpkins, and all of our regular size vessels over there, we cool down in about 8 to 10 hours. So the size or thickness of the glass is going to change how long that cooling cycle needs to be. And again, if you've just joined us or if I failed to mention it, this piece will be viewable through the museum's virtual outreach in the form of Facebook. This live stream is going to be archived on our YouTube channel. The imagery or photographs of our pumpkin spice and everything nice mug will be on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And Sarah, our designer, is going to receive this pumpkin spice mug in her home to enjoy forever. So our You Design It, We Make It program, our guest designer, Sarah Zani, sorry about that pronunciation. Our glass artist, lead team artist, Chris Rochelle, our assistant, Alex Young, myself, Jamie, and Amanda helping out with our virtual chats. Here we're just fire polishing the bottom, making sure there's no sharp edges. And then we'll place this piece away in our oven. And we'll get a closer look at it in a day or two. All right, fantastic. Ladies and gentlemen, let's have a round of applause for our You Design It, We Make It pumpkin spice and everything's nice demo. Anybody who's here with us live today, if you have any questions, come on down. I'll do my best to answer them for you, tell you more about our You Design It, We Make It program. Anybody with virtual questions, you can throw them at Amanda and we'll do our best to get them here at the very end. For those of you that joined us close to the end of the demo, we're going to take a little bit of a break. Can't see the clock right now, but we'll come back doing our live standard demos throughout the rest of the afternoon, both in the innovations area and down here at the amphitheater throughout the rest of the day. Whatever you choose to see and do, folks, please enjoy the rest of your visit here at the Corning Museum of Glass. Our virtual friends, Sarah, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see everybody again soon. Bye-bye.